Picture this: a perfect $2.3 million colonial home in Greenwich, Connecticut, surrounded by golden autumn leaves scattered across a perfectly manicured lawn, while the smell of mom's famous herb crusted turkey fills the dining room, and everything looks like a flawless Norman Rockwell painting, until my father slides a manila envelope across the table during dessert and calmly begins to dismantle my entire place in the family without even looking at me. Perfect autumn leaves rested across the lawn in a way that felt almost staged, while the warm smell of food wrapped around the room and created an illusion of comfort that completely shattered the moment my father announced the new succession plan for Patterson and Associates while cutting into his pumpkin pie like it was just another normal conversation. Sarah would receive 40% controlling interest, and Michael would get 35%, while the remaining 25% would go to the American Cancer Society. And I sat there silently doing the math in my head, realizing that my share of everything I had helped build came out to exactly 0%, with not even a mention of my name anywhere. I had spent 3 years working as an unpaid consultant, fixing their accounting disasters, and personally lending them $18,000 when they could not make payroll. Yet, somehow, I did not even deserve a footnote in the legacy they were so casually distributing across the table. My mother smiled with that cold and practiced expression she used for disappointing waitstaff, while explaining that leadership should go to family members who had actually contributed something meaningful to the business, as if everything I had sacrificed never truly existed in their version of reality. As I walked out trying to process what had just happened, I overheard my father on a panicked phone call in his study explaining that if they could not settle their situation by December 15th, they were looking at Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And in that moment, everything shifted in my understanding of what was really going on. This was not just about cutting me out of success, but about cutting me out of a sinking ship that they knew was about to collapse, while they pretended everything was still under control in front of everyone else who did not know the truth. The next morning, they called a family meeting in my father's home office, where all of them stood together like a tribunal, including my sister Sarah with her MBA from Wharton, who had never worked a real job, and my brother Michael, who had failed at 2 startups and was still living in the guest house. Sarah began speaking in a condescending tone, explaining that they wanted to be objective about contributions, while listing her degree and Michael's so called entrepreneurial experience before reducing my entire role to being nothing more than a background person in the business. I kept my voice calm while reminding them of the Hendricks Group overbilling scheme that I had uncovered, which saved them $18,000 annually. But my father dismissed it instantly by saying that I made everything about money, and that family business required loyalty, vision, and heart, rather than spreadsheets and paranoia. Michael eagerly supported that idea by bringing up his networking success, which really meant playing golf with a CEO, while I had done months of unpaid proposal work behind the scenes. Yet my mother insisted that my attitude was the exact reason they made their decision. I looked around the room, realizing that Sarah was praised for a minor rebrand that changed a logo font, while Michael was celebrated for casual networking, and my forensic accounting work that uncovered serious fraud was labeled as disruptive and overly aggressive to the team environment. When I finally stood up to leave, I told them they should read the certified letters sitting on the desk before celebrating too much, and I watched their expressions change instantly as they recognized the return addresses from the IRS Collections Division and bankruptcy attorneys. They were not excluding me from a thriving empire, but from a financial disaster that had already spiraled beyond their control. And for the first time, I understood exactly how deep the situation really was beneath their carefully maintained image. I decided to show them exactly what being a background person had meant by going through every moment where I had stepped in to save them, including the night in 2019 when my mother called crying because my father had gambled away the mortgage payment. And I liquidated my entire retirement savings of $47,000 to keep them from losing everything. During the COVID years when their business lost most of its clients, I continued to fund their survival by covering rent, payroll, and operational costs through multiple large transfers that drained my accounts completely, while I lived with constant anxiety and uncertainty about my own future. I even took out a $35,000 loan against my car for my sister's wedding expenses because I believed in supporting family during important moments, even though that money represented months of financial burden for me afterward. When my brother's startup failed, leaving unpaid supplier debts, I paid those off as well to protect the family's reputation, bringing the total amount I had given them to $347,000 while receiving absolutely nothing in return except criticism about my lack of ambition. Despite everything I had done, they continued to treat me as if I was insignificant and easily replaceable, while secretly dealing with tax liens and financial obligations that proved they were far closer to collapse than anyone realized. Within days, they terminated my consulting role, attempted to damage my professional reputation, and forced me out of my living space, leaving me with almost no savings and no immediate support system. As I found myself staying in a cheap motel trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong. That was the moment where something inside me changed completely, because instead of continuing to feel like a victim, I started analyzing everything with the same precision I used in my professional work as a forensic accountant. I began reviewing business records, tax filings, and loan data, uncovering discrepancies that quickly escalated into clear evidence of fraud, including false employee counts and misuse of government relief funds that they had never expected anyone to question. The deeper I looked, the more serious the situation became, as I discovered years of tax evasion, misclassification of employees, and financial misconduct that could lead to severe legal consequences if exposed properly. Then they made the critical mistake of trying to frame me for embezzlement, which led to a police investigation that initially appeared threatening, but ultimately revealed the flaws in their strategy because I had documentation proving every transaction and interaction controlled. I gathered all the evidence, including recorded conversations, emails, and financial records, slow, and built a comprehensive case that outlined not only my innocence but their extensive wrongdoing across multiple areas of the business. My terms included immediate repayment of a portion of the debt, majority ownership of the company, full executive control, and a structured plan to resolve the remaining financial and legal issues while ensuring compliance moving forward. At first, they resisted and reacted emotionally, but as the reality of their situation became unavoidable, they realized that accepting my terms was the only viable option left to avoid complete destruction. At 4:47 in the afternoon, they agreed to everything, and in that moment, the power dynamic that had defined our entire relationship shifted permanently in a way none of us could ignore anymore. 6 months later, I was sitting in the CEO office overseeing a business that had finally become stable, profitable, and ethically managed, with significant improvements in revenue, operational efficiency, and employee satisfaction. However, the personal cost of that transformation became increasingly clear as my relationships with my family changed into something distant and transactional, where respect existed but genuine connection no longer felt the same. My sister and brother now worked under my leadership in reduced roles, while my parents treated me with a level of respect they had never shown before. Yet the emotional distance between us made every interaction feel controlled and unnatural. I realized that while I had regained my financial stability and professional authority, I had also lost the illusion of unconditional family support, which had once motivated many of my sacrifices in the past. Now I understand that real family is not defined by shared blood or history, but by mutual respect, honesty, and accountability. Because without those elements, relationships become one sided and eventually destructive. Everything else is simply a shared last name and a collection of expectations that mean very little when tested by real adversity and difficult choices. In the end, I did not just take control of a company, but redefined my entire understanding of loyalty and self worth, even though the outcome felt less like victory and more like survival.